Well, good morning to everyone, and I think I've said good morning individually to most people, but if I haven't, then this is it. You're done. There should be a new piece of paper, and I'm not sure if the last week's one is there as well, but it's the one that starts with more Old Testament prophecies about Jesus. So last week we looked particularly at two sets of prophecies. One was about the coming king, and the other group was about the coming servant, and said, well, actually these are one and the same person, which was a bit of a shock, a bit of a more than a surprise. It was not the way that people thought kings were. The idea of king being a servant was not normal thinking at all. But in God's way of doing things, they should be together. And today we have a few more groups. I read that there are 300 prophecies of Jesus in the Old Testament. Now, we obviously are not doing 300 of them. This is the second Sunday of doing it, and we're just doing 2 Sundays on this. So there's scope for a lot more, but that's going to be it for us. And if you want to get curious and dig in and find more, there's plenty more for you to dig around and find and work out. Before we get into them, let me tell you a little story. Some of you might have heard this story before, but a long time ago when I was 11 and became a Christian, and I didn't know much about what was going to happen when you become a Christian because I didn't have any Christians in my family or people I knew. But I kind of got the idea from the stories that I'd heard from the Bible, that God speaks to people. And that was something I didn't know anybody that had that sort of experience. So I expected that would happen. If I was going to be a Christian, that's what God would do. And God actually did. And it was about the person I was going to marry. I didn't really think I was up to that at 11. I wasn't really into boys or anything like that yet. But God was getting in first. Now, in that conversation and in some subsequent conversations, I got hints and I got a few signs so that I would recognise this person, because I was really scared that I would, might fall in love with someone and they wouldn't really be the right person, and I'd seen too many failed marriages in my family context. So I got some hints. These might seem very odd hints to you, probably would seem odd to anyone. One was the shape of his nose. Now, why God thought that was important, I don't know. But anyway, because my Jewish girlfriend spoke to us years and years and years later, in comparatively recent years, when she looked across the table one day and she said, look, he's got exactly the shaped nose. She's an artist, so she remembers shapes. Exactly the shaped nose that you described when you were 12. Well, I said, you just asked me, what I knew about who I was going to marry, so I just innocently told her. And I didn't tell too many people. There was 1 or 2 friends, and that's all. And another one was that his birthday was going to be in this range of 2 weeks. And then the third one that I knew at that stage was that he would be over a year when we wouldn't meet, and then when we met, he would propose marriage. I thought, that's not really the normal way you do things. From my little knowledge of, romantic books and all of that sort of thing. Anyway, all those signs were fulfilled, not to mention love and friendship and, all the other stuff that goes into it. But thinking back when I was 11, what did I know of this man that I was also told to pray for every day? And I said to God, how do I know what to pray? I don't know who he is, where he is, anything about him. And so God said I had to come to him each morning and ask what to pray. I thought, well, fair enough, he knows, so that's all right. That's kind of helped me to learn how to pray. And I think that the Old Testament prophecies really function a little bit like that, in that there were hints given, like you don't think the shape of the nose, how long he's going to be away before he proposes, and the other thing was birthday. within this range, which actually was fulfilled, well, was more exact than that, you don't think that they're terribly important bits of information. But when you look, when you meet the person. I remember meeting Stuart when he came through the door, and we were in a prayer meeting in the music room at university. And I kind of thought, this guy looks familiar. It's kind of like I've seen him before, but yet I knew I hadn't. Now, he didn't know anything about this. He didn't know any of this background, and I certainly didn't tell him until we were very, 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 very close to our wedding day. But, you hold these hints, and then the question is, will you recognise the person from those hints? Because you're getting a feel of the character of the person too, as you're praying for them every day for over all of these years. And I think that's kind of like how it worked. And when I did meet him, and then even when I saw that all these different things lined up, and there were a few more than what I've mentioned, they were all lining up. And I still wanted to test it. I still wanted to be sure. I didn't want to make a mistake. And so, it took a while for all that testing process to go on. And I remember being annoyed because every time I tried to pray for this unknown person, Stuart's face kept coming into the prayer, and I thought he's intruding into my prayer time. And, of course, gradually those two things came together, and we got married 4 years after we met. So let's look at some of these hints or little snippets of information that were given. And the first one is the place of birth. It wasn't his birthday, but it certainly was quite specifically the town, or we'd probably say village, of where this coming Messiah, this person promised, was going to be born. Now, we'll do like last week, and if people have, somebody has found the place, then just put your hand up. Stuart's got the microphone, and you can read it from whatever version you've got. Somebody got that? Nobody's going to put their hand up? Goodness me. This is not normally what you call an unusually quiet. Hard to find Micah. And we can't even give you the page number because we've all got different versions.
It's on the screen anyway.
Thank you. All right, who would like to read it from the screen?
Don't read it from the screen because that's not the right one.
That's not the right one.
Verse 2.
Verse 2.
Verse 2, is it? Let's have a look. 5. Verse 2. I was only going to remember it because I can hear the verse. Elaine's got it.
Halligan's got it.
There you go.
But thou, Bethlehem, Ephratah, though thou be little among thee, thousands of Judah, yet out of thee shall come forth unto me that is to be a ruler in Israel, whose goings forth have been from old and from everlasting.
So it's the same person, obviously. He's a ruler, and he's got this history that's eternal. He's not just a normal king. He's not any king. Born in Bethlehem, and this next word after Bethlehem is Ephratah. Now, we kind of skip that word out usually, but that basically says there are two Bethlehems in the land of Israel at that time. And one of them is Bethlehem Ephratah, which is Bethlehem that is down south in the region called Judah, which is not far from Jerusalem. That's the one. There is another Bethlehem right up north, a little dot of a place, and I can't remember what the other word is, but it's not that one. It's not the one that's up in the Galilee area. We don't hear much about it because it's not of great significance. Okay, the next one is Isaiah 7 verse 14. I'm going to read bits of this because I'm going to read a few verses around it. This I have mentioned this verse before, but we're going to talk about it today. Before we get to the verse, I'm going to read bits from this chapter, starting at verse 3. Then the Lord said to Isaiah, "Go out, you and your son, Shear-Jashub, to meet Ahaz," that's the king, King Ahaz, "at the end of the aqueduct of the upper pool on the road to the washerman's field, and say to him, be careful, keep calm, and don't be afraid. Do not lose heart because of these two basically enemies." And God doesn't think much of these enemies. Full of boasting, but they're really, not going to do anything. So, in other words, Isaiah is sent to King Ahaz to say, don't worry, just, hold your head up. These enemies up north that, are going to, they say they're going to destroy you. They've got no power in them, don't worry about them. I'm not worried about them, they're not going to do it. Then if we jump down, verse 10, again the Lord spoke to King Ahaz and said, "Ask the Lord your God for a sign," because Ahaz is still worried. He's not going to believe what God says about don't worry about his enemies. He's still worried. He's still upset. He's not a particularly godly king. And so he's given another chance. Ask the Lord your God for a sign, whether in the deepest depths or in the highest heights. In other words, to confirm that this is in fact what God is saying. Verse 12, but Ahaz said, "I will not ask, I will not put the Lord to the test." That sounds all very religious and nice, doesn't it? Oh, I'm not going to test the Lord, It says in Deuteronomy, don't test the Lord your God. But actually he's evading it because guess who's told him to put for the test? It's God himself. Through Isaiah, presumably, but it doesn't really say that. So actually it's an act of rebellion. He's basically saying, I'm content in what I think, thank you very much, God. I'm still scared. Verse 13, then Isaiah said to him, "Hear now, you house of David." So that's not just the king, but, everybody, and whoever's going to listen. "Is it not enough to try the patience of men? Will you also try the patience of my God? Therefore the Lord himself will give you a sign. The virgin will be with child and will give birth to a son and will call him Emmanuel." And that verse is picked up in the New Testament by Matthew and said this applies to Jesus. So we've got here a new idea, and that is that the mother is a virgin. Now, literally in Hebrew, this word is the same word that is simply for a young unmarried woman who was always, it was to be assumed, a virgin. They didn't have to separate it out and say, well, this one's had sex and this one hasn't. Like today you would. So the society was different. If you're a young unmarried girl, you are a virgin in their mindset. So then I could spend a lot of time on this verse, but we don't have the time. But we've certainly, the mother is a young unmarried woman who becomes pregnant and presumably is a virgin. She'll give birth to a son, we'll call him Emmanuel, which simply means God with us. And there's a bit more about a sign to the king. Now, this does apply to Jesus. Mary was in fact a virgin when the child was conceived. And even though she was married by the time that, married to Joseph by the time that he was born, But the king, King Ahaz, also needed a sign. And for him, it would have referred to a young woman he knew, who presumably probably in the royal court, who gave birth to a son. She was a young woman. Some people have said, was it Isaiah's wife? No, excuse me, but Isaiah's gone out to the field with his son. Isaiah's wife has already given birth to at least one son at this stage. Doesn't apply to any of those people. You can go through the list, and the only conclusion you can come to is that within 2 years, the time that the child is going to eat curds and honey and reject the right, no, that's a 2-year-old in their mind. And there is somebody that he knows who unexpectedly is going to have a baby, but it's not necessarily a virgin as we know it, because this is a young unmarried woman. So it's because Ahaz wouldn't take notice of God to stop worrying that God said, well, I'm going to give you a bigger sign. Now, we could spend a lot more time on that, but we don't have it. Hosea chapter 11, verse 1 says something about Egypt. Now, Hosea's the beginning of all those little tiny books. I'll read this one. When Israel was a child, I loved him. This is God speaking. And out of Egypt I called my son. But the more I called Israel, the further they went. Da, 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 da. But this bit is quoted in Matthew chapter 2, verses 13 to 15, because just after the wise men have left from coming to visit Jesus as a baby, Joseph has a dream. Reading this bit from Matthew 2, 13 to 15. When they had gone, that's the wise men, an angel of the Lord appeared to Joseph in a dream. Get up, he said. Take the child, that's Jesus, and his mother, and escape to Egypt. Stay there till I tell you, for Herod is going to search for the child to kill him. So he got up, took the child and his mother during the night, and left for Egypt, where he stayed until the death of Herod, and so was fulfilled what the Lord had said through the prophet, out of Egypt I called my son. So that went into the list. These are little funny little hints that people in the Old Testament times were putting together. There are some verses about the birth of Jesus. Now, what about his ministry? What kind of a person? What was going to happen with that? Well, first of all, there's somebody who's preparing the way. Isaiah chapter 40, perhaps somebody could read this for us, verses 3 to 5. Wendy's got it.
The voice of one crying in the wilderness, prepare the way of the Lord, make straight in the desert a highway for our God. Every valley shall be exalted, and every mountain and hill brought low. The crooked places shall be made straight, and the rough places smooth. The glory of the Lord shall be revealed, and all flesh shall see it together, for the mouth of the Lord has spoken.
Does that sound familiar from somewhere in the New Testament? John the Baptist, thank you, Eli. So, if you want to note where it occurs in the New Testament, it's Mark chapter 1, 2 to 4. I'm not going to read it out because it's pretty much just a quote of what it says in Isaiah. And it's related to John the Baptist. And it's interesting that all 4 Gospels write about John the Baptist, and they write about preparing the way. They all identify John the Baptist with this person who has been prophesied to come ahead of the Messiah, the one that's coming. Isaiah chapter 9, verses 1 and 2. Would somebody like to read that? Marion, thank you.
Nevertheless, the gloom will not be upon her who is distressed, or when at first he lightly esteemed the land of Zebulun and the land of Naphtali. and afterwards more heavily oppressed her by the way of the sea beyond the Jordan in Galilee of the Gentiles. The people who walked in darkness have seen a great light. Those who dwell in the land of the shadow of death, upon them a light has shined.
Thanks, Marion. This is up north in the Galilee area. So Zebulun and Naphtali are two tribes of Israel that lived up north. That was their land. That was their allotted place to be. And, it hadn't been a very, important place. Jerusalem was the important place. But here, this person who's coming, he's going to come there. He's going to come to Galilee. And the people who are there walking in darkness have seen a great light. And the light is the presence of Jesus and what he's talking about and what he's doing. Okay? So Galilee is going to be on the map because Jesus thought Galilee was an important place to go to. Now, Isaiah 61, verses 1 and 2, these are wonderful verses describing the ministry of this person who we know who would be Jesus. Can we have somebody read that, please? Isaiah 61, verses 1 and 2.
The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because the Lord hath anointed me to preach good tidings unto the meek. He has set me to bind up the brokenhearted, to proclaim liberty to the captives, and the opening of prison to them that are bound, to proclaim the accepted year of the Lord, and the day of vengeance of our God, to comfort all that mourn.
And this comes out in the New Testament. If anybody wants to write it down, I'm not going to read it this time. Luke chapter 4, verses 14 to 21 is the story of when Jesus went back to his hometown of Nazareth, where he grew up, not where he was born, but where he grew up. And as was the custom, he was invited to read. He was handed the scroll and he took it, and this is the exact passage that he read from. I can only guess, but I can't prove, that it was the set reading for the day, because they did have patterns of readings right throughout the year, much as many churches do today. So that's my guess, that it was the reading for the day, and he took the scroll and he read it, sat down to read, which was the custom, and then he added something. Today, this verse has these words, have been fulfilled. Your hearing. What's that?
I said in your sight.
In your sight or
hearing,
in your hearing, something like that. We could turn it up to read it. But in other words, he's making a very clear connection between the prophesied person, the Messiah, and himself coming there, and he's declaring that's what he's on about. That's what he's come to do. And it's a pretty remarkable set of things to do. Preaching good news to the poor. Well, lots of people preached. I'm not sure that they always preach good news. Binding up the brokenhearted. There's comfort there and encouragement. Proclaiming freedom to captives. Well, there are people in personal captivity, emotional captivity, slavery, all kinds of things. But it could be some who are in literal captivity in prison, and to release from the darkness for prisoners, and to proclaim the year of the Lord's favour and the day of vengeance. This is the day of judgment. Because you see right through the New Testament as well as the Old Testament, salvation and judgment are kind of like two sides of the coin. Because when God comes, in whatever period of time, he comes to save, but those who are not interested in what he's come to do for salvation will unfortunately find themselves experiencing the other side. and that is judgment, which, God doesn't want. That's not, we want to be proclaiming good news. But it is also reality. Are you wanting to say something here?
A question.
Yeah.
Would that year the Lord's favour be a Jubilee year?
I would think so. I think it probably was a Jubilee year. Yeah.
So that is sort of mark the timing on it. Something.
Well, yes, it probably would. Yeah. I haven't looked into that. Have you looked into that, Stuart? But that would make sense. Good question. And then Genesis 3:15, right back to the first book. Could we have a reader for that, please?
And I will put enmity between you and the woman, and between your seed and her seed. He shall bruise your head, and he shall bruise his heel.
Thank you. And then here, the context here is God is speaking to the snake, the serpent, back in the Garden of Eden. And the serpent, of course, had been the one who had led Eve and Adam astray. So he really is the one who's standing for evil. And here, it's interesting at the end of, the man and the woman have sinned, etc. And we often think, well, the man and the woman were put under a curse. That's not actually true. It's the serpent that was put under a curse. Cursed are you above all livestock. The man and the woman get consequences for what they've done wrong. And the man gets the consequence of harder labour to be able to produce his food in the fields, and the woman has the consequence of harder childbirth labour in bearing children. So they're consequences. They're sad consequences, they're difficult consequences, they're still around. But it's not it's not the same as what is given to the serpent, which is a curse. But here, he represents evil, and if at the end of it says, in my version, he will crush your head to the serpent, that's Jesus is going to crush your head. If you get your head crushed, you've had it. That's it. You will strike his heel. Well, striking your heel is painful, but it doesn't kill you. And so basically he's saying, you've had your day. Your days are numbered because there is one coming who has a much greater power than you have. You can only get the heel of people. But this one coming has the power to be able to crush your head. In other words, knock you out. And so part of Jesus' ministry is dealing with the power of the evil one and effectively knocking it out. And then we see examples of that sort of thing happening. There are people who are demon possessed and so forth, and who are brought to Jesus, and he just says a word, and the evil influence goes. And but we also know that that's still around, and the day will come when you'll be knocked out totally. The next category is leading up to the death of Jesus. Last week we read Isaiah 53, or verses from it. And so this is some different verses here. So first of all, leading up to that, we have Palm Sunday, riding on a donkey. So Zechariah, which is right near the end of the Old Testament, there's Zechariah and Zephaniah. Zechariah is the second last book, and it's chapter 9, verse 9. Could somebody read that, please? Zechariah Malachi.
Rejoice greatly, daughter Zion. Shout, daughter Jerusalem. See, your king comes to you, righteous and victorious, riding and riding on a donkey, on a colt, the foal of a donkey.
Now, a king riding on a donkey was a bit of an oddity. But what do kings normally ride on? Horses. So a horse is the animal of victory, the animal of ruler. You know, if you're going to show your power, you ride on a horse, a stallion. Not a donkey. A donkey's for the everyday, ordinary people. It's you know, now we've got Joseph and Mary riding into Jerusalem. Well, you know, Mary's on a donkey because they're not rich, they're poor. That's their means of transport. It's like Indians and Asians get around on motorbikes. Whole family is on the motorbike. And, you know, we've seen examples of, say, 6 people, plus all their luggage and their fruit at the market and their everything else. It's all on the one motorbike. That's all you do. You want to go to hospital. You're going to go to emergency, you get on your motorbike. Sometimes I think, you know, if you're really, really, really sick, that's not an easy ride. But a donkey's that kind of an animal for a poor family. What's a king doing riding on a donkey? But here it's a choice by Jesus. He's identifying with the ordinary people. And that's where it comes from anyway. It comes from an ordinary, humble family. But he's identifying there rather than with the ruling class, the richies. And that's why he could speak to the ordinary people so powerfully. Psalm 22 is a very relevant psalm. It has lots of references to the crucifixion. So I'll probably read some bits from this. The first verse, my God, why have you forsaken me? Does that sound familiar? Where have you heard it? The cross. They are the words that Jesus cried out on the cross. Now he would have known this psalm inside out. He was a well-trained Jewish boy. Did he cry out those words because he knew the psalm? It might have come to mind, but really it was expressing what he felt. Because the sin of the world, the sin of all of us, he was feeling that being placed upon his shoulders, and as he was feeling that, it was making some kind of a barrier which made him feel like God, his Father, had forsaken him. Now, God did not forsake him, but that's what it would have felt like from Jesus' perspective. And he'd never experienced that because there'd never been that sin blockage in a way because he didn't have any sin. But as he took my sin, that's what was happening. And it was coming across. And suddenly, my God, like we've always been so close. We've always had this, you know, immediate communication both ways anytime we want. What is going on? Now, he may well have known what was going on, but it's expressing his feeling at this moment. And usually, if you find like a psalm like this where you think, right, this word is being, this first verse is signalling there's a connection between here and what happened on the cross. Let's look further, and we look further, and we find that there are other verses which also speak about some things, sometimes quite specifically. So we'll go down to verses 7 and 8. All who see me mock me. They hurl insults, shaking their heads. He trusts in the Lord. Let the Lord rescue him. Let him deliver him, since he delights in him. But they're saying it in a mocking tone. Do we know that Jesus was mocked on the cross? Yes, we do. There's several times in several of the Gospels where it says that different people mocked Jesus. So I'm not going to find all of those. And then we jump down to verses 16 to 18, and we've got a few other aspects of this that are significant. The first part is, dogs have surrounded me. Now, a band of evil men has encircled me. They have pierced my hands and my feet. Now, when you see the word dogs here, it's not literally animals walking around on fours. It is humans who are the evil men. They are the attackers, the aggressors. These are the nasty dogs, the ones walking on certain Asian streets you don't want to go near because their teeth are out and they've got rabies and they're ready to, do something. So, you sort of look at those and think, well, you take a wide berth there. And so it's a metaphor for people who are aggressive like that. Pierced my hands and my feet. Yes, Jesus had his hands and his feet pierced. And then the next one, surprisingly, is I can count all my bones. So there was no breaking of bones, which we know was normal for somebody being put on a cross and dying on a cross. I remember the soldiers came round, they had to see if he died, and if he hadn't died, they would break his bones. They came along and they pierced his side where the blood and the water came out, and there were no broken bones because they didn't need to break the bones, he'd already died. Verse 18, they divide my garments among them and cast lots for my clothing. Now that is specifically referred to in the New Testament. Luke chapter 23, verse 34, if you want to write that down, it says the soldiers did that. So they were standing around and casting lots and getting different pieces of Jesus' clothing, and the undergarment was kept in one piece, and somebody got to cast lots to get that. And the last one in this group, Zechariah 11, verses 12 to 13. Now this is back to Zechariah, the second last book of the Old Testament. And Dave might get it before any of us, I don't know. Verses 12 to 13. This is a kind of a story that's told in Zechariah. He's a prophet. He's telling a little story about two shepherds, a good shepherd and a bad shepherd. And who will read these two verses, 12 and 13? You can read it either from the screen or from your Bible.
Then I said to them, if it's agreeable to you, give me my wages, if not, refrain. So they weighed out for my wages 30 pieces of silver. And the potter said to me, throw it to the potter. That princely price they set on me. So I took the 30 pieces of silver and threw them into the house of the Lord for the potter.
Yeah. Okay, so it's referred to the 30 pieces of silver. It's referred to in Matthew 26, verses 14 and 50. This is the amount that Judas, who betrayed Jesus, was paid. And then when he was fed up at the end and realised what a bad thing he'd done, he threw that money across the temple floor, and he ended up committing suicide and was buried. And that was the potter's field where he was buried there. So that's there's some passages about that. Let's go to pause with another brief story. When I was 35, I had this experience in Launceston, which I've referred to before, when the Lord called me to proclaim the name of Jesus among the nations. Not going into all the details here, we don't have time. And I thought, I told Stuart, he was the only person I was going to tell, and I thought he would immediately say, no, that's crazy, but he didn't. He said, that's from God. I've asked him many times since, how did you know that was from God? He said, I don't know, but I just know. So what does it mean among the nations? I mean, here we are in Tasmania doing whatever we're doing, fairly ordinary stuff, among the nations. How does it mean that God's going to bring international students here and we can meet them there? Well, that's one possibility, we thought. We had no idea. We could not work it out what it meant. But you just hold it and you think, God, if this is from you, then, you bring it about. And there were a number of times over the next number of years where I said to God, look, I don't want to hold this in my mind if it's not from you. If I'm just imagining it, I'm not interested in just imagining stuff. And it was confirmed each time I asked whether it really was from God or not. But you still don't know what it's going to look like. You still don't know when. You have no idea how. And so what do? You just live your life and you take one step at a time. That's all you can do. A lot of people have some kind of prophetic word or something, and they think, oh, well, I've got to rush out and do it. No, you don't. If God's got a plan, if He's got a purpose, He can bring it to pass. We don't have to force it to come to pass. That's not God. And anyway, a subsequent call came to go to Canada. I just thought that didn't quite fit with what I thought, but it fitted with a new call. So we went to Canada. And I remember we were in a prayer meeting there with people we'd never met before, had never met since. And they told both of us, they said, you are called to be among the nations. They even named some countries. And we thought, goodness me, this is very close. Some of the words were even the same. And it was clear that it involved Stuart too, which of course I had assumed would be the case. But again, I didn't know. How you have this, but you don't know. Then the next step was England. And then by the time we actually went to any non-Western country, I was 60 and Stuart was 61. Like, you don't kind of expect from 35 to 60. You sort of think, oh, well, surely it's got to happen when you're in the prime of life. I mean, you look at the emails we send every day, and they represent 5 continents. So we are still, even though we're here, and we're not travelling overseas, we are still among the nations on a daily basis, being asked questions, being asked advice, all kinds of things. And so we live here and we live there, being scattered out there. But it's just another example of God saying something ahead of time. You have no idea what it's going to look like, except you've got these little tiny hints. And you look back, we look back now and say, every single thing that was spoken to us has been fulfilled. Whether that means we're ready to die or not, or there might be more for us to do. But it's just, you can look back and you can put it together. But when you're at the beginning end, it's very hard to do that. You don't know how it's going to look like. You don't know how it's going to come about. And you just follow in obedience each little tiny step, and you've got no idea whether they're going to take you in that direction or not. And then you suddenly wake up and you think, oh, guess what? This is that. I've got 3 more readings, and these really pertain to the future of Jesus' authority that is ongoing. Daniel chapter 7, verses 13 to 14. I love these verses here.
In my vision at night I looked, and there before me was one like a son of man, coming with the clouds of heaven. He approached the Ancient of Days and was led into his presence. He was given authority, glory, and sovereign power. All nations and peoples of every language worshipped him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion that will not pass away, and his kingdom is one that will never be destroyed.
This is the first time we see Jesus being referred to as Son of Man. And when Jesus was on earth, that was his favourite title, Son of Man. Because Son of Man can have the idea of it being just an ordinary person. I'm a son or a daughter of man, I'm just a human. Or it can be a human with a special purpose. And so he chose that title with that kind of, with those questions around it. And so this, the Ancient of Days is God. This special person came with the clouds of heaven. So this is not an ordinary person. He's Son of Man, so he's looking like an ordinary person, but he's coming with the clouds of heaven. So his is an ordinary human, or at least one that looks like an ordinary human, with a special origin and a special eternal authority. He comes to the Ancient of Days, that's God, and goes to his presence and given authority, glory, and sovereign power. So this is very much like some of those verses that we read last week about giving the authority over to Jesus. And then we have all peoples, nations, and people of every language worshipping him. He's not a Jewish national hero. He's an international figure with international authority, even though, humanly speaking, he comes from the Jewish people. But there is another aspect to his being, and that is that he comes from the clouds of heaven. He comes from God. So he's both human and God. And his authority goes right over the whole world. It's everyone. So we're all there. We're all his people. And Isaiah 25, verses 7 and 8. Oh, sorry, yes. Jeremiah, sorry, I missed that. Can we have someone someone got that?
Behold, the days are coming, says the Lord, when I will make a new covenant with the house of Israel and with the house of Judah.
Yes, so here's the new covenant, and then it goes on to say in that passage more that it's not just a matter of obeying the law that's written down, but it will be put into the hearts. So this is a heart covenant, not just an outward covenant that you have to keep. Right, and the last one from Isaiah 25, verses 7 and 8. Someone? Marion, you ready?
Yeah. And he will destroy it on his mountain, on this mountain, the surface of the covering are cast over all the people, and the veil that is spread over all nations. He will swallow up death forever, and the Lord God will wipe away tears from all faces, the rebuke of his people. He will take away from all the earth, for the Lord has spoken.
Yes, the veil or the shroud or the cloth or whatever it is that's over the people represents death. You know, this kind of sense that we have that one day we all have to die. It's dealing with that. It's dealing with death. And what we see in Revelation, the time will come when the sovereign Lord will wipe away the tears from all the faces. That's talking about heaven. He will remove the disgrace of his people from all of earth. The Lord has spoken. But Jesus' ministry, we've got prophecies here from birth, the middle, to death, and going on beyond that his authority, his power and his glory continue and will continue to minister to us in this life and even when we have passed this life into heaven. I thank God for Jesus.
Amen. Amen.